Welcome, everybody, to the final episode of Keep the Line Moving 2024. I am your host, Chris Gargano. This is the podcast where we talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. Hopefully, you leave today inspired for 2025. That is the goal. And for you new listeners, we hope you are hooked and you'll be with us throughout 2025. Today, we're going to listen to little excerpts, highlights from 6 different guests that we've had from the previous 12 months and how those guests and their topics are aligned. You'll hear more about this word in just a second, with some key concepts that surface naturally, organically within these conversations with other guests and within our workshops, one-on-one coaching, and keynote speeches that we've done this previous year as part of the company, the Gargano Leadership Group, right? So why are these topics surfacing? Well, I'm going to ask 4 questions to you that you could write down, not if you're driving or mowing the lawn or skiing or at the gym or whatever, but you can think about and write down later. We talk about this all the time. I know you're doing different stuff when you are listening to the podcast. Here is what they are. 4 questions to help you in 2025 if you're leading people. Or if you're part of a culture, right? And that word will surface throughout this episode today. What is a culture? How is it created? All right. Number 1, are you curious as a leader? Do you ask questions of people? Or do you just come in and say, here's what we need to do. We got to get it done. Or do you know your people? If you're a leader and someone says, hey, does X leader know me? What are people going to say about you? Number 2, are you aligned? Is the story you tell yourself exactly what you do? In other words, I am an accountable, hardworking individual. Well, are you accountable? Do you work hard? Those are just examples. And is it consistent with who you say you are? Number 3, are you optimistic? Not false positive, not somebody who walks around goofing around and telling jokes all day, but can you frame adversity in a way that allows your folks, your team, to see a possible path forward to succeed? And the last question is, are you self-aware? Do you know what people think of you? Not in a way that like, I'm overly sensitive or peer pressure. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Do you know how you come across? Do you know your actions, words, body language, how they're impacting people? It takes work. And that's why we're talking about these 4 questions today. Are you curious? Are you aligned? Are you optimistic? And are you self-aware? Okay, let's give you examples through the awesome guests that we've had throughout 2024. Are you curious? Why does that matter? Well, in episode 76 of Keep the Line Moving, I think it was back in May, Dr. Rich Cellini, he's a professor, he's been there for 25 years at the University of San Francisco. He put it perfectly. Let's let him talk about why it's important to be curious and get to know your people.
I got to work with so many great people through the years, and they all had the similar characteristics. They had the ability to bring out the best in people. They figured out who you were in a fairly short order and what needed to happen to bring out the best in everybody. So I really think it's more of those traits of being the servant leader. And students will ask me, Chris, how come more people don't do it? I'm like, it takes a lot of energy to figure out who other people are. It's much easier just to run on your own hamster wheel. To really motivate somebody, you got to figure out who they are, and it takes time, and you got to think about it. But you have to have conversations.
And we thank Rich very much for being on the show. He's a great friend and was a great guest. Speaking of great guests, Heather Maxwell was tremendous in episode 87, and she talks about transactional, relational moments. This is for alignment, right? Who are you? Do you understand how you're coming across as a leader? Are you aligned with the person that you are, and how do you show that? Well, Heather Maxwell talks about it again in episode 87 from this past year.
So there's something I'm constantly talking to my team about, and it's the difference between being relational versus transactional. Okay. Relational is that seeking to understand what motivates that person. What is their language? everybody has at their core, like what really motivates them the most. It's not the only thing, but I think the more that you can seek to understand others and the more that you can get to know someone, their background, what they enjoy, what lights them up, what dims them a bit, you can really work even better with them. So the seeking to understand is super important.
Great wisdom from Heather Maxwell. Now we're on to the question, are you optimistic as a leader? Why is this important? Well, let's go to our guest in episode 66, Joan Ryan, the author of the book Intangibles. She took 10 years and put together research, constant conversations with different participants featured throughout the book on why team chemistry is real. And coming into a locker room with a certain demeanor as a coach, as a player, as a collective, making up a culture, and how you frame, again, how you want to stand for something bigger than yourself. She uses the example of player Johnny Gomes, who everywhere he went, he made those teams better by being a great teammate, by having an optimistic viewpoint on how to help a teammate, how to have a conversation, how to make sure that a culture is being developed. He was a career 242 hitter, yet he won every place he was. And Joan Ryan puts why team chemistry is important so well.
Yeah, I mean, the Johnny Gomes thing was really a revelation. Did he do anything spectacular to make them better? No, it was his presence. It was his connection to every single guy on that team. I mean, Johnny Gomes was the guy who would, if somebody's in a hitting slump, he'd go into the video room by himself and look at every single at bat that guy had taken, that season, and go back to the guy and say, I noticed this. So he literally was helping elevate the guy on that level, but he also was helping elevate because Johnny Gomes was so committed to his teammates. It was a family to him. I mean, really was a family to him.
Such great information from Joan. And that is a tremendous book, Intangibles, that she wrote. It came out a few years ago. All right. Coincidentally, in episode 100, it's another former colleague of mine at the San Francisco Giants, Bobby Evans. Joan is a consultant with the Giants. Bobby Evans was the former senior vice president and president of baseball operations. He was my former colleague there. And I'll tell you what, the way he frames servant leadership, right? Self-awareness. We are here as leaders for our people, not the other way around. The people are not there for the leader. The leader has to work for the people. Bobby Evans puts it really well.
Yeah, I think I learned a lot about leadership from years serving on our leadership board at church, and in many ways I learned very quickly that there's only one type of leadership. It's servant leadership, where you serve others as a leader. It's not top down. It's supporting from the ground up, and helping see people achieve great things, and it's not about getting the credit yourself. It's about putting people in a position where they have success, and ultimately the greater good for the organization or company, or in many cases for me, the church as well.
Okay, we've now talked about curiosity, why that's important, to be aligned, optimism, and now self-awareness. What happens when you're a leader, not a servant leader, but you're somebody who just isn't getting it? You're deceitful. You care only about your agenda. You're selfish. You're not there for your people. How do we change the culture with people like that? Well, Tom Cox has an idea. He was featured in episode 109 of Keep the Line Moving in 2024. Let's let him say it.
Unfortunately, a lot of people use manipulation, deceit. They're selfish, self-focused, self-directed. They move up too, and it's unfortunate. And so one of the things that I try to do is I teach people who would be great leaders but don't have the confidence to do that. I teach them the understanding that if they don't lead, those manipulators will. And so if you think about it this way, we all have, those of us who are authentic, empathetic, and audacious leaders, we have a mandate, if you take a step back and think about it, to become great leaders. Because if we don't, it will leave people to be led by poor leaders.
Tremendous point by Tom Cox. And so if you're discouraged as a leader, you're doing everything right, you're curious, you're aligned, you're optimistic, you're self-aware, but you're not getting to where you're going fast enough, right? Patience. When I was young, I didn't even know what the word meant. I just wanted to go, go, go. But if I could give you any information, and some of these incredible guests say it all the time, be patient. And Janelle Wells, author, educator, she was featured in episode 101, a very popular episode. What a conversation she and I had. And she puts it very simply about why you should keep going.
And I think that's just really important. That's always been me, is to observe and to bring light where I can, and one thing, Chris, I want to leave you with is that talking to the student last week, someone was questioning her authenticity and your genuineness. And I told her, I go, listen, I'm 20 plus years ahead of you, and people will still, but I will never let someone dim my light, right? And make sure that no one ever dims your light, right? Because you have a light to be shared and shown to this world.
Hopefully, from these examples, these highlights from these incredible guests in 2024 on this very podcast, Keep the Line Moving, has you thinking a certain way that can create a path for you to be the best version of yourself in 2025. Remember those 4 questions. Let's say them one more time. Are you curious? Are you aligned? Authentic, right? What do you say about yourself? Do you do that? Are you optimistic? Remember, not false positivity, but just framing adversity or challenges in a way that we can all do this together. And lastly, are you self-aware? Do you know how your people see you? Are you kind? Do you make eye contact? Do you make room for them? Back to Bobby Evans and others about servant leadership, to Cellini, who said you got to spend time with folks, right? So what is this all? Let's wrap this up. What does this all mean? Okay. In episode 73, the CEO of USA Lacrosse, Mark Riccio, said, he put it very simply, as a leader, be somebody people want to be around. Be somebody people want to be around. It's so simple, yet very difficult for some. I spent 13 years in the NFL. So this time of year is very interesting for me, right? You have teams that go to the playoffs and teams that don't. Teams that struggle every single year, some in the middle that are on the cusp, and then some that you see in the playoffs every year, it seems, right? To develop a culture in the NFL or in business is made up of many individuals. And let's go back to the beginning, asking these 4 questions, understanding the wisdom shared by these guests. And hopefully you listen to this podcast and others throughout the year, and you're reading and you're just putting in information in your head, and you're trying to become a better leader because you make up the culture of your company or your organization. It is incumbent. You are responsible for your contribution to the culture. We talk about this all the time in our workshops, right? That we do with the business, the Gargano Leadership Group, which is this. You're part of it. You're part of what makes the company or organization go. So it's your responsibility, especially if you're a leader, to understand this and study it, to be better, to constantly understand, how do people take in information? What's AI doing? How can I make my people not intimidated by that? As an example, right? Or what's going on with remote, hybrid, or in person? How can I make sure that I'm understanding everyone's wants and needs, right? And it goes back to that servant leadership. It goes back to working to understand your people so you can have a culture. Back to the NFL. The teams that win, take a look at their cultures. There's consistency, right? There's consistency at the top. The coach has probably been there for a while. The quarterback, right? Everybody says it's a quarterback league. I understand that. I'm not blind to that. Some of these quarterbacks are absolutely amazing, and you could see why they win. But there are other factors that contribute to great quarterback play. If you look at the top quarterbacks in the NFL, they're usually paired with a head coach who's been there a while. The stats prove it. And the teams that win have consistency in leadership. And it's so much more than just those two folks, the coach and the quarterback. It's everyone on the 53-man roster, including the practice squad. They're all on the same page, working to do exactly what we talked about today. Remain curious, stay aligned, be optimistic, and be self-aware of how you're coming across as a leader. And what Tom Cox said, that leaders that don't do that should be pushed aside. I know that's a little bit harsh. And I said it on the podcast on that episode 109, maybe not pushed aside. I respect the heck out of Tom, but maybe push them into an area of what we're talking about today. Understand how you're coming across and perhaps make some changes. So in the NFL, you don't lose every year, or in corporate, maybe you're not getting what it is that you want to achieve, and your organization and or group of people can be a little bit better if you work to understand how you're coming across as a leader. It's been an incredible year, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this final episode of Keep the Line Moving as much as we have. Savin Narwhal is our producer of this podcast. She's also head of our marketing. She's amazing. I have to give her a specific shout out because she is so talented. She's been with us since day one, and it is so awesome to work with her. She deserves the credit for helping to produce all that we do at the Gargano Leadership Group. If you enjoy this podcast, please recommend it to your family, friends, and coworkers. Subscribe, hit the thumbs up, leave us a comment. Let's make this audience huge in 2025. That would be really fun. I think all of us would benefit from that. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week. Happy New Year to you. Every week, you hear guests on this podcast talk about some of their biggest leadership challenges. As a leader, you want to make an impact on those you lead and reach your organization's goals, while also optimizing your time management. Wherever you are in your leadership journey, we could all use some help. This is what we focus on with our group and individual coaching services. To book a call or get more information, email me directly at chrisg@garganoleadership.com or visit our website at garganoleadership.com. For our podcast and video producer, Jack Radutsky, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwhal, have a great week, everybody.